It was another high-stakes Monday morning in the bustling headquarters of tech giant Orion Enterprises. Located in the heart of the city, the building itself was a testament to power and success, its sleek glass exterior reflecting the ambition of those inside. Every corner of the office seemed alive with energy, from the sharp click of heels against the marble floor to the low hum of intense conversations. It was the kind of place where decisions could change lives and fortunes overnight. Jonathan Hayes, the company's CEO, strode into the boardroom as if he owned not just the company, but the world. He was the kind of leader people noticed immediately. With his crisp designer suit and perfectly styled hair, Jonathan was a man who thrived on control and admiration. His voice, sharp and commanding, could silence a room in seconds. But it wasn't just his appearance that held people's attention, it was his reputation. Jonathan was known as brilliant, some might even say a genius when it came to business strategy. Yet, alongside his sharp mind came an equally sharp tongue. He was quick to dismiss ideas he didn't like, often with a sarcastic remark or an impatient wave of his hand. For Jonathan, only his opinion mattered. This morning, however, there was a new kind of buzz in the air. Word had spread that Elon Musk, the legendary innovator and CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, had reached out to propose a partnership. Elon Musk, one of the most influential figures in the tech world, wanted to collaborate with Orion Enterprises. To most, it sounded like an incredible opportunity, perhaps even the chance of a lifetime. The boardroom was packed with top executives, their excitement palpable. Discussions broke out in hushed tones as they speculated about what this partnership could mean. "Imagine the possibilities," one whispered. "This could put us years ahead of our competitors." But as Jonathan entered the room, his expression said it all. He wasn't impressed. He glanced around at the eager faces of his team and let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "Elon Musk," Jonathan repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he settled into the leather chair at the head of the long conference table. He leaned back, crossing his arms with the air of someone who had already made up his mind. "We don't need him. His flashy antics don't align with our brand." The room fell silent. Some executives exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly disappointed by Jonathan's reaction. But no one dared to challenge him. After all, Jonathan had built Orion Enterprises into the powerhouse it was today. If he didn't see value in Musk's offer, who were they to argue? Sitting at the far end of the table was Sarah Langley, a low-level research assistant. She was so unassuming that most people in the room hardly noticed her. Sarah was the kind of employee who blended into the background, quiet, diligent, and reliable. She was known for her meticulous work, but in a company like Orion, where bold personalities dominated, she often went overlooked. This morning, like every other, Sarah sat with her notebook open, scribbling notes as Jonathan spoke. She adjusted her glasses, pushing them higher up the bridge of her nose, and kept her head down. No one gave her a second glance, and she didn't expect them to. But what no one realized, what no one even suspected, was that Sarah was not as ordinary as she seemed. Behind her calm exterior, Sarah had been quietly observing, analyzing, and connecting dots that others had missed. She had a mind for strategy, a knack for details, and a deep understanding of technology that rivaled even the most senior engineers at Orion. As Jonathan continued his monologue about why Elon Musk was overrated, Sarah's thoughts raced. She couldn't understand how someone as smart as Jonathan could be so short-sighted. She knew what this partnership could mean for the company. She had spent the past weekend reviewing the data, and the numbers didn't lie. Orion needed this. Without a game-changing move, the company was on a slow but steady path to losing its edge in the market. But what could she do? She was just a research assistant. Her job was to listen, take notes, and stay in the background. Speaking up in this room, especially in front of someone like Jonathan, felt unthinkable. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had to be done. She glanced around the room, watching the other executives nod along to Jonathan's words, their faces a mix of forced agreement and hidden doubt. No one wanted to risk disagreeing with the CEO, even if they privately thought he was wrong. Jonathan, meanwhile, was in his element. "Look," he said, leaning forward and placing his hands flat on the table for emphasis. "Orion Enterprises has always succeeded because we follow our own path. We don't need gimmicks. We don't need partnerships with people who are more focused on Twitter drama than real innovation." A few people chuckled nervously, though it was clear they were laughing more out of obligation than genuine amusement. Jonathan smirked, satisfied with his own wit. At the end of the table, Sarah tightened her grip on her pen. She wanted to say something, anything, but her instincts told her to stay quiet. Instead, she wrote a single word in the corner of her notebook: "Why?" Why was Jonathan so quick to dismiss an opportunity without fully understanding it? Why was no one else in the room questioning him? Unbeknownst to Jonathan and the rest of the boardroom, Sarah had been quietly gathering information for weeks. She had noticed trends in the market, warning signs in the company's financial reports, and missed opportunities in their recent projects. And now, with Elon Musk's offer on the table, Sarah saw a chance to turn things around. But how could she make her voice heard? How could she convince a room full of people who barely noticed her that she had something valuable to say? As the meeting continued, Jonathan's confidence remained unshaken. But Sarah knew something he didn't. She knew that every decision had consequences. And Jonathan's dismissal of Elon Musk's offer would set off a chain of events that no one in the room could predict, least of all Jonathan himself. Jonathan concluded his speech with a flourish, a smug smile lingering on his face as he scanned the room for approval. His gaze lingered on each board member, daring them to challenge him. None did. Most nodded, a few scribbled notes, and others simply looked away, unwilling to meet his piercing stare. "Good," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Now that's settled, let's move on to more important matters." For Jonathan, the matter was closed. Elon Musk wasn't worth his time, and he had made that abundantly clear. Yet, Sarah Langley couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. She felt like she was watching a train hurtling toward disaster, and no one else seemed to notice or care. The meeting progressed, with discussions shifting to quarterly projections, ongoing projects, and market trends. Sarah jotted down notes, her pen moving swiftly across the page, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying Jonathan's words in her head: "We don't need him." But we do, she thought, clenching her jaw. More than anyone realizes. Orion Enterprises was a titan in the tech industry, but even titans could fall. Sarah had seen the cracks forming, subtle signs that their dominance was slipping. Their competitors were catching up, launching products that were faster, cheaper, and more innovative. Meanwhile, Orion's growth had slowed, its once bold strategies replaced by cautious, incremental updates. Sarah had spent countless late nights poring over data, tracking industry trends, and analyzing market reports. She had seen the opportunities the company had missed, the risks they had underestimated. And now, Elon Musk, a man whose vision had reshaped entire industries, was offering them a lifeline. But Jonathan was too proud to see it. As the meeting dragged on, Sarah's frustration grew. She glanced around the room, her gaze flitting from one executive to another. Most of them looked bored, their attention wavering as Jonathan rambled on about market positioning and shareholder value. None of them seemed to grasp the urgency of the situation. Finally, Jonathan wrapped up the meeting with his usual flourish. "All right, that's enough for today," he said, standing and straightening his tie. "Let's make sure we're ready for the shareholder presentation next week." Dismissed. The room began to empty, the executives filing out one by one. Sarah stayed behind, gathering her notes and waiting for the others to leave. Her mind was racing. She knew she couldn't let this go, but she also knew she had to be strategic. Jonathan wasn't the type to tolerate dissent, especially not from someone as junior as her. As she stood to leave, she noticed Jonathan lingering by the window, staring out at the city skyline. He looked relaxed, almost smug, as if he had just secured another victory. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yes? What is it?" Sarah hesitated, clutching her notebook tightly. I wanted to ask if we're absolutely sure about turning down Elon Musk's proposal. It seems like it could be a valuable opportunity." Jonathan's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. "You think so?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Yes," Sarah said, summoning her courage. "I've been reviewing the data, and—" Jonathan held up a hand, cutting her off. "Listen, Miss Langley, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't your area of expertise. Leave the big decisions to the people who know what they're doing." The word stung, but Sarah forced herself to nod. "Of course," she said quietly, retreating toward the door. As she walked away, Jonathan returned his gaze to the window, dismissing her entirely. But Sarah's mind was already racing with a new plan. If she couldn't get through to Jonathan directly, she would have to find another way. That evening, Sarah stayed late at the office, long after most of her colleagues had gone home. The building was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional ping of an elevator the only sounds. Sarah sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her, scrolling through pages of data. She pulled up the proposal Elon Musk had sent, a detailed document outlining the potential partnership. It was bold, ambitious, and exactly what Orion needed. Musk wasn't just offering financial investment, he was offering access to cutting-edge technology, a global network of resources, and a visionary approach that could propel Orion into the future. But Jonathan hadn't even read it. Sarah had seen the unopened email sitting in his inbox during the meeting. He had dismissed the idea outright, refusing to consider the possibilities. Sarah's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She knew she was taking a risk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was too important to ignore. Carefully, she drafted an email to one of the board members, attaching key sections of Musk's proposal along with her own analysis. In the email, she laid out her case, why the partnership was vital, what it could mean for Orion's future, and how the company stood to lose if they turned it down. She hesitated for a moment before hitting send, her heart pounding. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office early, her stomach in knots. She wasn't sure if her email would make a difference or if it would backfire completely. But as the day went on, she noticed subtle shifts. Board members began whispering in the hallways, their expressions tense. Jonathan's assistant rushed in and out of his office, her face pale. By mid-afternoon, a new meeting had been scheduled, a meeting that included Elon Musk. Sarah's pulse quickened. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she had a feeling it was just the beginning. Jonathan dismissed the proposal with a wave of his hand, a gesture so casual it seemed to trivialize the significance of the opportunity. "We've done just fine without him, and we'll continue to do just fine," he said, his tone as final as a slammed door. The room fell silent. Executives exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable, yet not a single one spoke up. Jonathan's authority loomed too large, his reputation too intimidating. To challenge him was unthinkable. In the corner of the room, Sarah Langley tightened her grip on her notebook. Her knuckles turned white as she considered her next move. The silence weighed heavily on her, but the knot of frustration in her stomach was heavier. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Excuse me, sir," she said, barely above a whisper. Jonathan turned his sharp gaze on her, his brows furrowing in incredulity. "What was that?" he barked. "Speak up. Do you have something useful to add? The room held its collective breath. All eyes turned to Sarah, a lowly research assistant who, until this moment, had barely been acknowledged by most of the team. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to meet Jonathan's piercing gaze. I just think, she began, but the words caught in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to continue, but the weight of the moment crushed her courage. She shook her head, lowering her gaze. Never mind, she murmured. Jonathan's expression twisted into a smirk, a mix of amusement and disdain. That's what I thought, he said, turning back to the table as if Sarah no longer existed. Let's move on. Sarah sat frozen, the humiliation washing over her in waves. Around her, the executives shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. But deep down, Sarah's hesitation wasn't a sign of defeat. It was strategy. She knew speaking out in that moment would only backfire. Jonathan was a man who thrived on control and dismissed dissent with a flick of his wrist. To confront him outright was to invite his wrath and risk being shut down permanently. No, she would speak, but not yet. As the meeting continued, Sarah tuned out the drone of corporate jargon. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the growing conflict within her. She wanted to scream at the top of her lungs, to demand that anyone listen to reason. Instead, she stayed silent, scribbling furiously in her notebook. The data didn't lie. Orion Enterprises was on a precipice, and Jonathan's stubborn refusal to adapt was pushing them closer to the edge. The market was evolving, their competitors growing bolder, and Orion's dominance was beginning to crack under the weight of complacency. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind, "We don't need him." But Sarah knew better. She had spent months analyzing the company's performance, tracking their decline in key areas. While their public image remained strong, the internal numbers told a different story, one of stagnation and missed opportunities. Elon Musk's proposal wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. A chance to innovate, to leap ahead of their competitors, and to secure Orion's future. But Jonathan's pride had blinded him to the potential. Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed the cracks. Quietly, she observed her colleagues in the days following the meeting. The tension in the office was thicker than ever. Executives whispered in hallways, their conversations halting whenever Jonathan appeared. Departments operated in a state of quiet anxiety, afraid to make mistakes but also unsure of their direction. Jonathan, however, seemed unfazed. He strode through the office with his usual confidence, barking orders and demanding results. To him, everything was under control. But Sarah could see the cracks forming. One afternoon, as she was heading to the break room, Sarah overheard two senior managers talking in hushed tones. "Did you see the latest market analysis?" one whispered. "If we don't innovate soon, we're done." "I know," the other replied. "But what can we do?" Jonathan's made up his mind. "You know how he gets when someone challenges him." Sarah pretended not to hear, but their words stayed with her. It wasn't just her who saw the danger, it was everyone. But fear kept them silent. The tension reached a boiling point during a company-wide presentation the following week. Jonathan stood at the podium, delivering a speech full of confidence and bluster. He spoke of Orion's achievements, their strong market position, and his vision for the future. But as Sarah sat in the back of the auditorium, she noticed the faces of her colleagues. They weren't inspired, they were wary. Some exchanged skeptical glances, while others stared blankly at the screen. Jonathan was oblivious to their unease. He ended his speech with a flourish, announcing a new product launch that he claimed would redefine the industry. The applause that followed was polite but muted. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah felt a wave of determination wash over her. She couldn't stay silent any longer. The stakes were too high, and the company's future was too important to leave in Jonathan's hands alone. In the days that followed, Sarah began working on a plan. She knew she couldn't confront Jonathan directly, so she decided to take a different approach. She started compiling a comprehensive report, one that outlined the company's vulnerabilities, highlighted the opportunities presented by Musk's proposal, and provided a clear, data-driven argument for why the partnership was essential. Late at night, after most of her colleagues had gone home, Sarah sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of reports and spreadsheets. She worked tirelessly, piecing together her findings into a cohesive narrative. Her report wasn't just numbers and charts, it was a story of a company at a crossroads, with a choice to either evolve or fade into irrelevance. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of fear. What if Jonathan dismissed her report as easily as he had dismissed her in the meeting? What if she became a target for his wrath? Still, Sarah pressed on. She knew that doing nothing wasn't an option. When the report was finished, Sarah faced her next challenge: how to get it into the right hands. She knew she couldn't give it to Jonathan directly. Instead, she decided to approach one of the board members, a senior executive named Linda Chang, who had a reputation for being open-minded and pragmatic. One evening, as Linda was leaving the office, Sarah intercepted her. "Excuse me, Ms. Chang," she said nervously. "Could I have a moment of your time?" Linda paused, looking at Sarah with mild curiosity. "Of course," she said. "What's on your mind?" Sarah handed her the report, her hands trembling slightly. "I think this might be important," she said. "It's about the proposal from Elon Musk." Linda raised an eyebrow but took the report. "I'll take a look," she said. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention." As Linda walked away, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The die was cast. All she could do now was wait. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the office shifted subtly but unmistakably. Linda Chang's demeanor became more focused, her eyes narrowing in thought as she read through Sarah's report. She didn't say anything immediately, but Sarah noticed Linda staying later than usual, making calls from her office with the door closed. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued to operate as if nothing had changed. He strutted through the halls, barking orders and dismissing any concerns that didn't align with his vision. His confidence was unshakable, or so it seemed. Sarah worked quietly, keeping her head down and avoiding unnecessary attention. But beneath her calm exterior, her nerves were frayed. Each time she passed Linda in the hallway, she searched her face for a hint of approval or rejection. But Linda remained impassive, her expression unreadable. Then, one morning, Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw an email in her inbox with the subject line, "Meeting Request, Musk Proposal Analysis." It was from Linda. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon, and Sarah spent the entire day in a state of restless anticipation. When the time finally came, she walked into the conference room to find Linda already seated, along with two other board members, Richard Cole, a seasoned strategist, and Anita Patel, the head of financial planning. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," Linda said, motioning for her to sit. Sarah nodded, her palms damp as she took a seat. "We've reviewed your report," Linda began, her tone measured. "And we believe it raises some valid concerns." Sarah felt a surge of relief but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you," she said quietly. Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Your analysis is thorough," he said. "But you must understand, Jonathan has a very specific vision for this company. Convincing him to reconsider will not be easy." "I understand," Sarah replied. "But I believe this partnership is too important to ignore. If we don't act now, we could lose our competitive edge." Anita chimed in, flipping through a printed copy of the report. "The financial projections are compelling," she said. "But Jonathan won't respond to numbers alone. He needs to see the bigger picture, the vision." Linda nodded. "That's where you come in, Sarah. You've done the groundwork, but we need to build a narrative that speaks to Jonathan's priorities. Can you help us with that? Sarah hesitated, taken aback by the request. Me, she asked. Yes, you, Linda said firmly. You're the one who saw the potential here. You're the one who cares enough to fight for it. We need your voice in this. Over the next week, Sarah worked closely with Linda, Richard, and Anita to refine the proposal. Together, they crafted a presentation that combined hard data with a compelling narrative, designed to appeal to Jonathan's ego and ambition. The presentation framed the partnership as a bold move away for Orion to not only reclaim its position at the top but to redefine the industry itself. It highlighted the alignment between Elon Musk's visionary approach and Orion's long-term goals, presenting the partnership as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Sarah poured everything she had into the project, working late into the night to perfect every detail. She knew this was her chance to make a difference not just for the company, but for herself. The day of the presentation arrived, and the tension in the office was palpable. Jonathan entered the boardroom with his usual swagger, clearly expecting another routine meeting. But as soon as he saw the faces around the table, his expression hardened. "What's this about?" he demanded, taking his seat at the head of the table. Linda was the first to speak. "We've called this meeting to discuss the Musk proposal," she said calmly. "There's new information we believe you should consider." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "I thought I made myself clear on this," he said. "We're not pursuing it." "With respect, Jonathan," Richard interjected, "we believe this warrants a second look. Sarah has put together a comprehensive analysis that highlights the potential benefits." Jonathan turned to Sarah, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. "Sarah," he repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "The research assistant." Sarah felt the weight of his gaze but refused to falter. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, sir. I believe this partnership could be transformative for Orion. I've outlined the key points in the presentation." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Fine," he said, his tone dismissive. "Let's hear it." As Sarah began the presentation, her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly found her footing. She spoke with clarity and conviction, guiding the room through her analysis and weaving together the data with a narrative that emphasized the stakes. She highlighted the company's declining market share, the missed opportunities in emerging technologies, and the competitive advantages Musk's proposal could bring. She framed the partnership as a bold, forward-thinking move that aligned with Orion's core values of innovation and excellence. As she spoke, she noticed a shift in the room. The board members leaned in, their expressions growing more focused. Even Jonathan's initial skepticism began to waver, replaced by a hint of curiosity. When Sarah finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Linda spoke. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. "That was well done." Jonathan remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "I'll need time to review this," he said curtly. The meeting adjourned, and Sarah left the room feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. She had done everything she could. Now, it was up to Jonathan. In the days that followed, rumors swirled around the office. Some said Jonathan was furious about being challenged, while others claimed he was reconsidering his stance. Sarah tried to stay focused on her work, but the uncertainty was agonizing. Then, one afternoon, she received an unexpected email from Jonathan's office: "Meet me in my office at 3 p.m. Sarah's heart raced as she read the message. She had no idea what to expect. When she arrived, Jonathan was seated at his desk, his expression inscrutable. He gestured for her to sit. "I've reviewed your report," he said without preamble. "And while I don't appreciate being blindsided in my own boardroom, I can't deny that you've made some valid points." Sarah held her breath, waiting for him to continue. "I'm willing to reconsider the proposal," he said finally. But I'll be watching closely to see how this plays out. Don't make me regret this. The partnership with Elon Musk was officially announced 2 months later. The deal sent shockwaves through the industry, positioning Orion Enterprises as a leader in innovation once again. For Sarah, it was a personal victory not just for the company, but for herself. She had taken a risk, spoken out when it mattered, and made a difference. And while Jonathan remained as demanding as ever, Sarah noticed a subtle change in his demeanor. He no longer dismissed her so easily. Sometimes, she even caught him glancing her way during meetings, a hint of respect in his eyes. For Jonathan Hayes, the world looked as steady and bright as ever. He moved through the office with his usual arrogance, flashing confident smiles and barking orders. Every department operated under his strict scrutiny, and every decision seemed to align with his vision of control. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming in the empire he so proudly commanded. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, Sarah Langley was uncovering a trail of evidence that could change everything. Each late night at her desk, each confidential file reviewed, and every overheard conversation added another piece to the puzzle. What she discovered was alarming. Orion Enterprises wasn't just underperforming, it was on the brink of a financial crisis. At first, Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. The company's cash reserves were dwindling, their market share was slipping, and competitors were quietly outpacing them in innovation. But the most shocking discovery came from the numbers surrounding Elon Musk's proposal. The partnership wasn't just a golden opportunity, it was the lifeline Orion desperately needed. Without it, the company's future was bleak. Jonathan doesn't realize what he's turning down, Sarah muttered to herself late one evening. The glow of her laptop screen illuminated the stacks of papers and data sheets sprawled across her desk. She clicked through another series of spreadsheets, her heart sinking further. A deadline loomed. Key investors were already starting to question the company's direction, and the clock was ticking. But Sarah couldn't simply walk into Jonathan's office and demand he reconsider. She knew how dismissive he could be, especially towards someone in her position. She needed a plan, a way to bring her findings to light without drawing his ire. Sarah started taking small but deliberate actions. She quietly approached Linda Chang, the coup, during a rare moment of downtime. "Linda," Sarah began hesitantly, clutching a folder of her findings, "can I have a moment of your time?" Linda glanced up from her desk, her expression cautious. "What is it, Sarah?" "I've been analyzing some data related to the Musk proposal," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I think there's more at stake than we realized. If you have time, I'd like to show you what I've found." Linda sighed, clearly busy, but something in Sarah's tone caught her attention. "All right," she said, motioning for Sarah to sit. Over the next 10 minutes, Sarah outlined her findings. She spoke quickly but clearly, pointing to key figures and explaining the potential consequences of rejecting the partnership. When she finished, Linda leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "This is concerning," she admitted. "But you know how Jonathan is. He won't take kindly to being told he's wrong." "I know," Sarah replied. "But I don't think we can afford to stay silent. The numbers don't lie." Linda nodded slowly. "Leave this with me," she said. "I'll see what I can do." Despite Linda's cautious support, Sarah faced resistance at every turn. Each step forward seemed to bring new obstacles. Jonathan's loyal inner circle dismissed her concerns, brushing her off as an overzealous analyst. "Stick to your job, Sarah," one executive sneered during a meeting. "Leave the big decisions to the people in charge." But Sarah refused to back down. She kept digging, her determination growing with each passing day. She uncovered more damning evidence: key projects delayed due to lack of funding, partnerships falling through, and a troubling decline in employee morale. It was clear that Orion Enterprises was teetering on the edge, and Jonathan's refusal to adapt was pushing it closer to collapse. Word of Sarah's findings began to spread, though not always in her favor. Some colleagues admired her bravery, while others saw her as a troublemaker. "She's trying to save the company," one whispered. "She's overstepping her bounds," another countered. Even Linda seemed hesitant to push too hard. "I'm working on it, Sarah," she said during a brief hallway exchange. "But Jonathan's not easy to convince. We need more leverage." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. If she wanted to make a real impact, she needed something undeniable, something that even Jonathan couldn't ignore. One night, Sarah stumbled upon the breakthrough she needed. It was a seemingly innocuous memo buried deep in the company's internal archives, marked with a date from 3 years ago. The memo detailed an early-stage negotiation between Orion and another tech giant, a negotiation that had failed due to Jonathan's stubbornness. The missed opportunity had cost the company millions and allowed a competitor to dominate a lucrative market. Sarah's pulse quickened as she read through the document. The parallels to the Musk proposal were striking. History was repeating itself, and the consequences this time could be even more devastating. Armed with this new evidence, Sarah knew she couldn't wait for Linda to act. She needed to take a bolder step. She decided to approach Richard Cole, a seasoned strategist who had been with the company for decades. Though known for his pragmatic approach, Richard had a reputation for fairness and a willingness to challenge Jonathan when necessary. Sarah found Richard in the break room one afternoon, nursing a cup of coffee. "Mr. Cole," she began tentatively, "could I have a moment of your time?" Richard looked up, his expression curious. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" Sarah quickly outlined her findings, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. She showed him the memo and explained the parallels to the Musk proposal. When she finished, Richard was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "You've done your homework," he said finally. "And you're right, this is too important to ignore. Will you help me present this to the board?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with quiet determination. Richard nodded. "I'll do what I can," he said. "But be prepared, Sarah. If you're going to challenge Jonathan, you'd better be ready for a fight." With Richard's support, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they began preparing a comprehensive presentation for the board, outlining the stakes and the potential consequences of rejecting the Musk partnership. But as the date of the presentation approached, the tension in the office became almost unbearable. Whispers of dissent grew louder, and even Jonathan seemed to sense that something was amiss. "What's going on with the board?" he demanded during a staff meeting, his gaze sweeping across the room. "If anyone has something to say, they can say it to my face." No one dared to speak, but Sarah knew the moment of reckoning was fast approaching. On the eve of the presentation, Sarah stayed late at the office, fine-tuning the final details. She felt a mix of anxiety and determination, knowing that everything she had worked for was riding on this moment. As she packed up her things, Linda stopped by her desk. "Good luck tomorrow," Linda said quietly. "Thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "You've done well," Linda added. "Now it's up to us to make Jonathan see reason." Sarah nodded, her resolve firm. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. The next morning, the office hummed with anticipation. The board meeting loomed large on the day's agenda, and while most employees carried on with their usual routines, a subtle tension filled the air. Jonathan Hayes, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, was in an especially good mood. As Sarah walked into the building, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. She clutched her presentation folder tightly, knowing the weight it carried. Richard had reassured her the night before, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into a lion's den. When she reached her desk, a small note was waiting for her. It was from Linda. "Trust your instincts. You're doing the right thing. Sarah smiled faintly, drawing strength from the simple words. The boardroom was a stark contrast to the bustling office outside. Its polished oak table, gleaming glass walls, and state-of-the-art technology exuded power and control. Sarah had never set foot in this room before, and now she was about to make a case that could alter the company's trajectory. Jonathan was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by senior executives and board members. He barely acknowledged Sarah's entrance, his attention focused on his phone. Richard cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. "Before we begin, there's a matter of urgent importance we need to address," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. Jonathan looked up, raising an eyebrow. "What's this about?" "It's about the Musk proposal," Richard replied. "And the implications of rejecting it." Jonathan's expression hardened. "I thought we settled that weeks ago." "I've made my position clear." "With all due respect, sir," Sarah interjected, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word, "the situation has changed. There's critical information that needs to be shared before any final decisions are made." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Fine," he said with a dismissive wave. "But make it quick." Sarah took a deep breath and began her presentation. The room was eerily silent as she spoke, her voice gaining confidence with each slide. She started with the data, highlighting the company's declining financial health and the growing pressure from competitors. Then she moved on to the specifics of the Musk proposal, detailing how it could not only stabilize Orion Enterprises but also position it as a leader in emerging markets. Finally, she revealed the memo she had discovered, the document that exposed Jonathan's past mistakes and underscored the dangers of repeating them. "This isn't just about a partnership," Sarah concluded. "It's about the future of this company. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything we've worked for." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mix of surprise and concern. Even Jonathan seemed momentarily caught off guard. "That's quite the narrative," he said after a long pause, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But it's just that, a narrative. You're blowing things out of proportion." "With respect, Mr. Hayes," Richard interjected, "the numbers don't lie. This isn't an exaggeration, it's a wake-up call." Jonathan's gaze shifted to Richard, his jaw tightening. "And you're siding with her?" "I'm siding with the truth," Richard replied evenly. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her, but she refused to waver. Jonathan wasn't the type to back down without a fight. He launched into a rebuttal, questioning Sarah's qualifications and accusing her of overstepping her boundaries. "You're a research assistant," he said coldly. "Stick to your role and leave the big decisions to those who understand the bigger picture." Sarah felt the sting of his words but stood her ground. "I may not have your title or experience," she replied, her voice steady, "but I have the facts. And the facts are clear." Her response drew a murmur of approval from a few board members, bolstering her confidence. As the discussion continued, Sarah and Richard worked in tandem to counter Jonathan's objections. They presented additional data, shared testimonials from key stakeholders, and outlined a detailed plan for implementing the partnership. Gradually, the tide began to shift. Board members who had initially sided with Jonathan started asking pointed questions, their skepticism giving way to genuine concern. "What's the risk if we don't move forward with this?" one member asked. "It's not just a risk," Sarah replied. "It's a certainty. Without this partnership, we're looking at significant layoffs, a loss of investor confidence, and a potential buyout from competitors." Her words hung heavy in the air, forcing everyone to confront the gravity of the situation. Jonathan, sensing his grip on the room slipping, tried one final tactic, undermining Sarah's credibility. "This is all conjecture," he said, his tone dismissive. "She's cherry-picking data to fit her narrative." But Sarah was ready. She pulled out a final piece of evidence, a signed letter of intent from one of Elon Musk's senior executives, confirming their willingness to proceed with the partnership if Orion acted quickly. "This isn't conjecture," she said, placing the document on the table. "It's an opportunity. And it's slipping away." The room fell silent as the board members reviewed the letter. After what felt like an eternity, the chairman of the board spoke. "We need time to deliberate," he said, his tone measured. "But I think it's clear that this matter deserves our full attention." Jonathan's expression darkened, but he didn't protest. He could see the writing on the wall. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to the board to make the right decision. The following days were a blur of activity. Rumors swirled, tensions ran high, and Jonathan's usual swagger seemed to falter. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her work quietly, knowing that her role in this battle was far from over. When the board finally announced their decision to pursue the partnership, the office erupted in a mix of shock and excitement. Jonathan, for once, was silent. But for Sarah, the victory wasn't about proving Jonathan wrong, it was about securing the future of Orion Enterprises. And though she had won this battle, she knew the war for change was just beginning. Jonathan Hayes was in his element, addressing the board with his signature blend of charm and authority. His words carried the weight of someone who believed he was untouchable. "Our quarterly performance might be a bit underwhelming," he admitted with a smirk, "but this is nothing more than a temporary hiccup. Orion Enterprises is built to withstand." The double doors at the back of the room swung open with a resounding echo, cutting Jonathan off mid-sentence. Heads turned as Sarah Langley stepped in, her presence commanding in a way no one had ever seen before. She was no longer the overlooked research assistant. Today, she was something else entirely: determined, composed, and backed by none other than Elon Musk, who walked in behind her. The room fell silent. Jonathan's confident demeanor cracked ever so slightly. "What is the meaning of this?" he snapped, his voice louder than necessary. Sarah stepped forward, meeting Jonathan's glare head-on. "Apologies for the interruption," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But there's urgent business the board needs to address. Something that can't wait any longer." Sarah handed a stack of files to the nearest board member, who passed them down the table. The board members began flipping through the pages, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to deep concern. "What is this?" Jonathan demanded, his tone sharp. Sarah didn't flinch. "It's a full analysis of Orion's financial situation, including projections for the next 6 months. The company isn't just struggling, it's on the brink of bankruptcy." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Jonathan's face turned a shade paler. "That's absurd," he barked, his voice laced with desperation. "Our finances are stable. This is fear-mongering." Sarah stepped closer to the table, her confidence unwavering. "With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, the numbers don't lie. While you were dismissing the partnership proposal, I was investigating the implications of rejecting it. What I found was alarming. Elon Musk's proposal isn't just advantageous, it's our lifeline. Without it, this company has less than a year before it collapses under its own weight." All eyes turned to Elon Musk, who had been quietly observing the exchange. He leaned forward, his demeanor calm yet authoritative. "I didn't come here to cause drama," Musk began, his voice steady but firm. "I came here because I believe in Orion Enterprises. You have the potential to revolutionize the industry, but potential isn't enough. It takes collaboration, bold moves, and, frankly, the ability to recognize a good opportunity when it's staring you in the face." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but Musk raised a hand, silencing him. Sarah saw that opportunity. She reached out to my team when no one else did. She asked the right questions, presented the right data, and showed the kind of initiative your leadership should be demonstrating. The board members exchanged glances, their trust in Jonathan visibly waning. Sarah took the opportunity to present the final piece of her case. She projected a series of slides onto the screen at the front of the room. "This," she said, pointing to the graph, "is where we're headed without the partnership. Layoffs, declining investor confidence, and a hostile takeover by one of our competitors. And this," she clicked to the next slide, "is what the partnership offers. Stability, innovation, and a chance to lead the market instead of chasing it." One board member raised a hand. "Why weren't we informed of this sooner?" "I tried," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But every attempt was dismissed before it could reach you." The room turned toward Jonathan, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jonathan stood abruptly, slamming his hand on the table. "This is a coordinated attack," he snarled. "A blatant attempt to undermine my authority." Sarah took a step forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Jonathan's outburst. "This isn't about authority, Mr. Hayes," she said. "It's about the survival of Orion Enterprises. Your decisions have led us to the edge of a cliff. I'm trying to pull us back." Jonathan's face contorted with anger, but before he could respond, Musk spoke again. "Jonathan," Musk said, his tone cutting through the tension like a knife, "leaders who dismiss innovation and collaboration don't last. Your refusal to even entertain this partnership is a textbook example of what not to do." The chairman of the board cleared his throat, breaking the silence that followed Musk's statement. "It seems to me," he began, "that we've been kept in the dark about critical information. This is unacceptable." Jonathan started to protest, but the chairman raised a hand to stop him. "Enough. It's clear that Ms. Langley has uncovered something we can't ignore. We'll need to vote on the partnership and on whether you've compromised this company's future." Jonathan's jaw tightened, his anger barely concealed. "You're making a mistake," he said, but his words lacked their usual conviction. As the board members deliberated, Sarah stood quietly, her heart pounding. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of her hands. When the chairman finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "The board has decided to move forward with the partnership," he announced. "And we'll be conducting an internal review of the company's leadership." Jonathan's face fell, the reality of his downfall sinking in. Security escorted Jonathan out of the building later that day, his protests echoing down the hall. Meanwhile, Sarah stood at her desk, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and disbelief. Musk approached her, offering a rare smile. "You did good," he said simply. Sarah nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. She had gone from being invisible to being the person who saved Orion Enterprises. And as she looked around the office, she realized something: this wasn't just a victory for her. It was a turning point for the entire company. As the decision unfolded, the tension in the room remained thick. The board members, many of whom had been staunch supporters of Jonathan Hayes for years, exchanged hesitant glances. Some still clung to loyalty, while others felt a gnawing sense of betrayal at being left in the dark. "Let's not rush to conclusions," one board member said, his voice cautious. "Jonathan has been at the helm of this company for a decade. Perhaps there's a misunderstanding." Sarah stepped forward, determined to eliminate any lingering doubts. "With respect," she began, "the data doesn't lie. I've compiled every financial metric, projected revenue streams, and analyzed competitor growth. Orion Enterprises is heading toward insolvency because we've been too slow to adapt. Our refusal to innovate and partner is costing us dearly." She turned to the screen, displaying the final slide in her presentation, a detailed breakdown of potential losses over the next 12 months. The figures were staggering. Gasps filled the room, and murmurs broke out among the executives. Jonathan, who had remained standing, finally snapped. "This is a setup," he shouted, his voice echoing in the spacious room. This is nothing but theatrics to discredit me." I built this company from the ground up, and I won't stand by while some junior assistant undermines everything I've accomplished. Sarah stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, the numbers speak for themselves. And while you've been busy dismissing critical opportunities, I've been working to save this company from collapse. Her calm tone only seemed to infuriate Jonathan further. He pointed a finger at her, his face red with anger. You're out of line, Langley. You're nothing more than an assistant. You don't have the authority to dictate terms to this board, let alone bring someone like Musk into this building without my approval. Elon Musk, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Jonathan, let me make one thing clear. I didn't come here because of you. I came because Sarah presented a compelling vision for Orion's future, one that aligns with my own goals for innovation and progress. Frankly, you're lucky she reached out when she did. Jonathan's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely unsure of himself. The chairman of the board, a seasoned executive with decades of experience, finally raised his hand to silence the escalating argument. Enough, he said firmly. This isn't about personal grievances or power struggles. This is about the future of Orion Enterprises. He turned to Sarah. Ms. Langley, you've presented a compelling case. The numbers are clear, and your initiative is commendable. But I have one question, why didn't you bring this to us sooner? Sarah hesitated, then answered with honesty. I tried. Multiple times. But every report I submitted, every email I sent, was blocked or ignored. I realized I needed to take a different approach to be heard. That's when I decided to contact Mr. Musk directly. The chairman nodded thoughtfully. And you, Jonathan? Do you have anything to say in your defense? Jonathan straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. This is a misunderstanding, pure and simple. We don't need Musk. We don't need outside help. Orion has weathered storms before, and will do it again. But his words rang hollow, and the board members were no longer buying it. The chairman cleared his throat. It's time to vote. First, on whether to move forward with the partnership proposed by Mr. Musk. Second, on whether Jonathan Hayes retains his position as CEO. The room grew eerily silent. One by one, the board members cast their votes. Each vote in favor of the partnership felt like a nail in the coffin for Jonathan's leadership. When the final tally was announced, the decision was unanimous: the partnership with Musk would proceed, and Jonathan Hayes was to step down immediately. Jonathan's face was a mixture of shock and anger. He stood frozen for a moment before slamming his fist on the table. You're all making a huge mistake, he growled. This company will fall apart without me. The chairman remained calm. On the contrary, Jonathan. This company is poised to thrive now that we're addressing its most pressing issues. You've done great things for Orion in the past, but your refusal to adapt has put us at risk. It's time for new leadership. Security entered the room, and Jonathan's protests grew louder as he was escorted out. This isn't over, he shouted, his voice fading as the doors closed behind him. With Jonathan gone, the room turned to Sarah. The chairman gestured for her to take the floor. Ms. Langley, you've shown remarkable insight and courage. I'd like to formally recognize your contribution to saving this company. Effective immediately, we'd like to appoint you as interim CEO to oversee the transition with Mr. Musk's team. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Musk said with a small smile. You've earned it. She took a deep breath, then nodded. Thank you. I'll do my best to live up to the trust you've placed in me. The partnership with Musk was finalized within weeks, bringing a wave of innovation and renewed energy to Orion Enterprises. Under Sarah's leadership, the company began rolling out groundbreaking projects that redefined its place in the industry. Employees who had once overlooked her now sought her guidance and respected her vision. Sarah had gone from being invisible to being the driving force behind Orion's resurgence. And as she sat in her new office, overlooking the city skyline, she couldn't help but smile. She had proven that even the quietest voices could change the course of history. The room was alive with activity, a whirlwind of whispered conversations, rustling paper, and the subtle hum of realization sinking in. Every board member was glued to the documents in front of them, reading, rereading, and passing the files to their colleagues. The realization was evident on their faces: Jonathan Hayes had failed them. He had led the company into a downward spiral, and Sarah Langley's findings had exposed the truth that could no longer be ignored. Jonathan's face turned a ghostly shade of pale, his earlier bravado completely shattered. He was no longer the confident, untouchable CEO who had commanded the room with his charisma and sharp tongue. Instead, he was a man caught in a lie, his grip on power slipping away with every passing second. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died on his tongue. There was nothing he could say now to cover up the disaster he had created. I don't understand," Jonathan stammered, desperately trying to salvage his position. "This is a mistake. You can't just throw everything away because of one partnership proposal." But his words were drowned out by the rising tide of murmurs and sighs from the board members, each of them processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. No one was listening to him anymore. They had all seen the undeniable truth laid out in front of them: the financial reports, the projections, the missed opportunities, all pointing to one stark conclusion: Jonathan Hayes had failed to lead. The chairman of the board, a seasoned executive who had been quiet up until this point, stood up. His voice was calm but resolute as he addressed the room. "Effective immediately," he declared, his words echoing through the room, "Jonathan Hayes is relieved of his position as CEO of Orion Enterprises." Jonathan's eyes widened, his mind racing. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising in panic. "You can't just dismiss me after everything I've done for this company." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The decision had been made. Security entered the room, their presence a silent reminder that there would be no further discussion. Jonathan stood frozen for a moment, his hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with frustration and disbelief. He glanced around the room, searching for a sympathetic face, but found none. Every board member was focused on the documents before them, too consumed by the truth to offer him any comfort. Finally, Jonathan's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew there was no way out. His reign as CEO was over, and there was nothing left to do but leave. As security escorted him out, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall was a stark contrast to the quiet tension in the boardroom. His downfall had been swift, and yet it had been a long time coming. With Jonathan gone, a profound silence settled over the room. For a moment, no one spoke. The air seemed thick with anticipation, as if the board members were waiting for something or someone to fill the void left behind. Sarah Langley, who had once been the overlooked research assistant, now stood in the middle of the room, the full weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Elon Musk, who had been watching quietly, turned to her with a smile that was both appreciative and knowing. "You've done it," he said. "I could use someone like you on my team." The words hung in the air, an offer that many would have eagerly accepted. But Sarah's gaze never wavered. She had her own path to follow now, one that didn't involve joining Musk's empire, as tempting as that offer was. Sarah had already proven that she could take charge, that she could steer Orion Enterprises toward a new future. She had fought for this company, and she wasn't about to walk away now. She glanced around the boardroom, her eyes landing on the faces of the board members who had just witnessed her triumph. They had seen her as nothing more than a low-level assistant just hours ago, but now they were looking at her with respect. She had earned it. "I think I'll stay here," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. "This company deserves a second chance. And I know how to fix it." Her words resonated through the room, and the board members nodded in agreement. There was no hesitation now, no doubt in their minds. Sarah Langley was the person who had saved this company. She was the one who had seen the problems no one else had and had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. She was the one who had turned the tide in Orion's favor. Elon Musk nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "I respect that," he said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he understood the significance of Sarah's decision. "I won't stand in your way." With a final glance at the door through which Jonathan had been escorted out, Sarah turned back to the board. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice resolute. The board members smiled, their confidence in her clear. They knew that Sarah was the leader they needed, the one who could pull Orion Enterprises out of the mess Jonathan Hayes had created. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Sarah wasted no time in getting to work. The first order of business was a complete financial overhaul, identifying the areas where Orion was hemorrhaging money and cutting unnecessary costs. The company had been operating on outdated systems and practices, and Sarah knew that modernization was key to its survival. She met with the heads of every department, listening to their concerns and ideas, and fostering a culture of transparency and collaboration. Employees who had once been too afraid to speak up now felt empowered to contribute, knowing that Sarah valued their input. The office atmosphere began to shift. There was a renewed sense of hope, a sense that the company was finally on the right track. Under Sarah's leadership, Orion began to innovate again. New projects were launched, old partnerships were restructured, and the company's financial health began to improve. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was clear that the company was headed in the right direction. And then came the announcement of the partnership with Elon Musk's company, which Sarah had spearheaded from the beginning. The partnership was a game changer, bringing with it new technologies, resources, and a renewed sense of purpose. The deal was finalized, and the two companies began working together on groundbreaking projects that would reshape the industry. As the months passed, Sarah watched as Orion Enterprises slowly regained its footing. The company was thriving once again, and the board members who had once doubted her now looked to her for guidance. But the real victory was in the way the company had changed. It was no longer the arrogant, complacent organization it had been under Jonathan's leadership. It was a company that was willing to adapt, innovate, and take risks. The justice Sarah had fought for had been served, not just to Jonathan Hayes, but to the employees of Orion Enterprises. They had been the ones who had suffered the most under Jonathan's rule, and now they were reaping the rewards of Sarah's hard work and vision. And for Sarah, it was more than just a professional victory. It was personal. She had shown herself, and the world, that even the quietest person in the room could change the course of history. She had gone from being an overlooked assistant to the CEO who had saved the company and, in doing so, she had proven that integrity, hard work, and determination could overcome even the most arrogant and destructive forces. As she sat in her new office, looking out at the city skyline, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had achieved something no one had thought possible. But there was still more work to be done, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. This was only the beginning. Months had passed since Sarah Langley had taken control of Orion Enterprises. The company, which had once been on the brink of collapse, was now thriving under her leadership. The deal with Elon Musk's company had proven to be everything Sarah had believed it could be. Orion's operations had been revolutionized, and the once dominant financial struggles were now a distant memory. New projects were being launched, innovative technologies were being developed, and employees who had once felt lost in the shuffle were now empowered and motivated. The company was moving forward in ways no one had thought possible. As Sarah sat in her new corner office, the view outside her window was breathtaking. The skyline of the city stretched out before her, with the sun setting behind the towering buildings. The orange and pink hues of the evening sky reflected off the glass, casting a warm glow across the office. It had been a long, difficult journey to get to this point, but now, as she stood in the space that had once seemed so far out of reach, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Her office, once just a fantasy, was now a reality. The glass walls, the sleek furniture, the view, it was all a symbol of how far she had come. Not just professionally, but personally. A few months ago, Sarah had been a low-level research assistant, dismissed by many as insignificant. But now, she was the leader of a company that was setting new standards and shaking up the industry. She turned from the window and walked over to the desk, her fingers lightly grazing the polished surface. The room was filled with reminders of everything she had achieved. There were files stacked neatly in the corner, a few framed photos of the company's team, and a plaque with her name etched in gold. It was a simple office, but to her, it was everything. It was a sign of the work, the sacrifices, and the battles that had led to this moment. But it wasn't just about the office. It was about what she had done for the people of Orion Enterprises, the ones who had believed in her, the ones who had stuck by her when things seemed impossible. It was about how she had turned the company around, how she had given it a second chance, and how she had proven that even the quietest voice in the room could make the loudest impact. As she gazed out at the city again, Sarah's thoughts drifted back to those early days, the days when Jonathan Hayes had been in charge. She remembered how he had dismissed her, how he had underestimated her at every turn. She remembered the way he had scoffed at the idea of a partnership with Elon Musk, certain that he could lead the company on his own. And she remembered the moment when she had made the decision to stand up, to take charge, and to reveal the truth. Jonathan had been so sure of himself. He had been the one everyone respected, the one everyone feared. But now, he was gone, replaced by a leader who understood the value of humility, of listening to others, and of putting the company's needs above ego. Sarah smiled to herself, knowing that Jonathan had learned the hard way. He had refused to listen, to see the potential in others, and in the end, he had paid the price. It was a lesson Sarah would never forget, the value of believing in those around you, the importance of collaboration, and the dangers of arrogance. But more than that, Sarah had learned something about herself. She had learned that strength didn't always come from loud words or flashy displays of power. Sometimes, it came from quiet determination, from understanding the bigger picture, and from never giving up even when the odds seemed stacked against you. She had proven that the people who were often underestimated, the ones who worked quietly behind the scenes, could be the ones who held the key to success. And those who refused to listen? They would always learn the hard way. The door to her office opened, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah turned to see one of her colleagues, Mark, standing in the doorway with a grin on his face. Mark had been with the company for years, and had witnessed firsthand the transformation Sarah had led. "Hey, Sarah," Mark said, walking into the room. "I just wanted to say, the board's looking at another round of new projects. They're all yours, if you want them." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Of course I want them," she said with quiet confidence. "This is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go." Mark nodded, impressed by her calm yet determined demeanor. "I'll let them know," he said, stepping back toward the door. "You're a force, Sarah." As Mark left, Sarah turned back to the window, her gaze once again falling on the skyline. She had come so far in such a short amount of time. It had been a difficult journey, but every step had been worth it. She thought about the lessons she had learned: never underestimate anyone, never back down from what you know is right, and always be willing to take risks. It wasn't just about getting ahead. It was about doing the right thing for the people who depended on you, for the ones who were with you from the beginning. And as she stood there, looking out over the city she had helped save, Sarah knew that she had proven something to herself. She had proven that she wasn't just a quiet assistant. She wasn't just someone who blended into the background. She was a leader. And nothing could take that away from her. Sometimes, the people we underestimate are the ones who hold the key to everything. And those who refuse to listen? They always learn the hard way. In that moment, Sarah realized something important. The quietest voices often carry the most power. She had never needed to shout. She had simply needed to believe in herself and in the people around her. And now, as she looked at the city below, she understood that this was only the beginning. The future was hers to shape.